Black rain is falling on Tehran right now. Not a metaphor, not a figure of speech. Literal, physical black rain. Oily, toxic, suffocating, descending on a city of 9 million people after wave of American and Israeli airstrikes turned Iran's oil infrastructure into columns of fire so massive they have blotted out the sun over the Persian Gulf. Sewage lines are burning underground. Fire is moving through the streets like water, following the path of least resistance, consuming everything in its way. Families are sheltering in basements with wet towels pressed over their mouths, trying to filter air that smells like the end of the world. And in Washington, the man who ordered all of this picks up the phone, calls ABC News, and says, and I'm going to quote this directly because you need to hear the actual words, "I am not worried about anything at all." That is where we are. That is the situation as of this morning. The President of the United States has launched a military campaign that has shut down the Strait of Hormuz for the first time in 80 years. He has sent energy markets into historic freefall. His soldiers, American sons and daughters, have come home in flag-draped coffins, their names read aloud on national television this past weekend. His strikes have triggered retaliatory attacks from Tehran to Tel Aviv to Bahrain to Kuwait. Regional infrastructure that millions of civilians depend on to survive, hospitals, water treatment plants, power grids, is on fire or already gone. And the President of the United States calls it, quote, a little glitch. He says, we had to take this detour. I knew exactly what was going to happen with the detour. I want you to hold that word in your mind for the rest of this video, because I am going to come back to it. A detour is something that happens on the way to somewhere you already know how to get. A detour implies a destination. A detour implies a route. A detour implies someone in the car who has actually looked at a map. In the next 15 minutes, I am going to walk you through exactly how this conflict spiraled from targeted military strikes into something that Iran's foreign minister, on American television this morning, described as a war with no acceptable end except a permanent one. I'm going to show you 3 specific moments from this weekend that function as receipts, evidence, windows into a decision-making structure that is, at this point, operating without brakes. But first, I need to ask you something. If someone picked a fight with you, sucker punched you, knocked you to the ground, and then offered you a handshake, and you took it, and the moment you reached out your hand, they hit you again, how many times would you keep reaching? How many times would you extend that hand before you made a different calculation? Drop your number in the comments. Because that question is not hypothetical. That is the exact strategic logic Iran just walked through on live American television this morning. And their answer to that question is reshaping everything. The speed of this conflict has done something insidious. It has buried the sequence of events that actually explain how we arrived here. When things move this fast, the beginning gets swallowed by the middle, and the middle gets swallowed by whatever happened 20 minutes ago. So let me slow it down. Let me give you the actual timeline, because the timeline is the argument. The United States and Israel began striking Iran. The early strikes hit military targets, missile facilities, air defense systems, command infrastructure. The stated goal was degrading Iran's ability to threaten the region and, specifically, to threaten any future diplomatic process around Iran's nuclear program. That is the public justification that was offered. Then the strikes expanded. They moved from military targets to oil infrastructure, refineries, storage depots, export terminals. The strikes that turned the sky over Tehran black. The strikes that are now choking 9 million civilians with petroleum smoke. And then, and this is the part that the American media has largely failed to lead with, independent investigations from Reuters, from CNN, and from the New York Times found evidence that strikes hit an elementary school in southern Iran. Over 170 people killed, dozens of them children. Read that again. Dozens of children. After that, Iran accepted a ceasefire. They framed it as an act of restraint. They said they were exercising self-defense, and that when the aggression stopped, their response would stop too. They shook the hand. They reached out. And then the strikes started again. More targets, hospitals this time, freshwater desalination plants, the infrastructure that literally keeps people alive in a region where clean water is more strategically vital than oil. The logic of the new strikes was not military degradation, it was civilian pressure. It was the theory that if you make the pain of the population unbearable enough, the regime will crack, the government will fall, the people will rise. That theory has a name. It is called collective punishment, and it is illegal under international law. But more importantly for this conversation, it has never worked. Not once. Not in Iraq, not in Gaza, not in Vietnam, not in any conflict in modern history where it has been attempted against a population with a strong national identity and a government capable of directing that identity's anger outward. Iran looked at the pattern. They looked at the ceasefire they had accepted in good faith. They looked at what followed that ceasefire. They looked at their schools and their hospitals and their water supply, and they made a different decision. This time, Iran said no. That single word, no, is now the load-bearing wall of this entire conflict. Because Washington's entire operational plan was built on the assumption that Iran would eventually fold, that the pressure would compound, the economy would buckle, the Revolutionary Guard would fracture, and Tehran would come to the table on American terms. The entire strategy depends on Iran saying yes. Iran said no. So now the missiles are flying in both directions. Ballistic missiles, Shahed drones in waves, cluster munitions landing in Tel Aviv and the surrounding metropolitan area. Retaliatory strikes on desalination plants in Bahrain, mirroring exactly, with surgical deliberateness, what was done to them. And the United States is standing in the middle of a conflict it started with no visible exit strategy, no diplomatic backchannel that appears to be functioning, and a commander-in-chief who is telling the American public he is not worried about anything at all. 3 receipts from this weekend. Let me show you what I mean. Donald Trump calls Mary Bruce at ABC News. This is a sitting wartime president choosing to go on national television while active combat operations are underway, while American service members are being killed, while the global energy market is in free fall. She asks him the questions any competent journalist would ask, the questions any citizen deserves to have answered. Are you worried about the risk to Americans here at home? Are you concerned about the possibility of domestic terrorist retaliation from Iranian-aligned networks operating inside the United States? What about the economic fallout, the gas prices, the grocery prices, the retirement accounts of ordinary Americans watching their savings erode in real time? His answer, verbatim. I am not worried about anything at all. I think it is fine. It is a little glitch. We had to take this detour. I knew exactly what was going to happen with the detour. There it is again, the detour. I want you to think about what it means, what it actually communicates when the most powerful military commander on Earth describes a conflict that has already produced American military casualties as a glitch. When 6 Americans are being carried off a plane at Dover Air Force Base in caskets, draped in flags, and the man who sent them there is on the phone with a television network calling it a detour. But that is not even the most revealing part of that call. In the same conversation, Trump says everything is on the table, including ground forces, including, and this comes from multiple sourced reports, special operations teams being deployed inside Iran to locate and secure enriched uranium stockpiles. He is describing the potential for American boots on the ground inside a nation of 90 million people that is currently firing ballistic missiles at its neighbors. And then he says something that should have stopped every foreign policy analyst, every national security expert, every person who understands anything about how sovereign nations work, cold in their tracks. Trump says that if Iran chooses its next supreme leader without consulting him personally, quote, the new one will not last long. Let me be precise about what that statement is. That is the President of the United States announcing on American television his intention to exercise veto power over the internal succession process of a sovereign nation of 90 million people. He is not talking about influencing an election. He is not talking about diplomatic pressure. He is saying he wants to handpick the supreme leader of Iran. That is not strategy. That is not even imperial overreach in the traditional sense. That is a man who has confused the map for the territory so completely that he can no longer tell the difference between a real country and a franchise location he is considering opening. The second receipt from this weekend is Lindsey Graham on the morning shows. Trump sends Graham out as a surrogate. This is standard wartime communications strategy. You use a high-profile ally to amplify and extend the message. And what follows is one of the most genuinely disturbing pieces of American political television produced during this entire conflict. Graham arrives on camera wearing two hats. Not metaphorically, physically wearing two hats, stacked on his head. One reads, "Free Cuba." One reads, "Make Iran Great." And then he speaks. "We are marching through the world. We are cleaning out the bad guys. Iran is going down and Cuba is next." Sit with that for a moment. A sitting United States senator, member of the world's greatest deliberative body, a man who has been in the room for some of the most consequential national security decisions of the last 3 decades, is on national television during an active military conflict that has already killed American service members, actively pitching the next war. Before this one is anywhere close to finished, before the Strait of Hormuz has reopened, before a single dollar of reconstruction has been committed, before the families of Captain Cody Cork and Sergeant First Class Nicole Moore have finished burying their dead. He calls Trump the greatest commander-in-chief of all time. He says, "You just wait and see what comes in the next 2 weeks. We are going to blow the hell out of these people." And then, and this is the moment that I think reveals the entire machinery of what is happening, he turns to America's Arab allies, countries like Kuwait, countries like Bahrain, countries whose desalination plants are being hit, countries whose oil exports have collapsed, countries whose civilian populations are caught in the crossfire of a conflict they did not start and were not consulted about. He looks into the camera and says, "If you want a treaty with the United States, you need to get in this fight." That is not diplomacy. That is not alliance management. That is not strategic communication in any recognizable tradition of American foreign policy. That is extortion, delivered on morning television, with a merchandise display on his head. And the fact that Graham sells Trump on military expansion by physically handing him branded hats, that the currency of strategic decision-making at this level appears to be novelty headwear, tells you something important about who is actually driving the doctrine here. The answer, increasingly, appears to be nobody. Nobody with a coherent theory of victory. Nobody with a defined endpoint. Nobody who has answered the most basic question any military strategist is supposed to answer before the first missile is fired. What does winning look like, and how do we get there? The third receipt is quieter. It doesn't have the spectacle of the Graham hats or the brazenness of the Trump phone call. But it might be the most telling of the three, because it shows you the information environment being constructed around all of this in real time. On Saturday, there was a dignified transfer at Dover Air Force Base. 6 American service members came home. Their remains were carried off a military transport in flag-draped cases in the ceremony the United States has performed to honor its fallen for generations. Solemn, precise, heavy with meaning. Donald Trump attended. He was wearing his $55 campaign hat, the same hat currently listed for sale on his campaign website. He wore it to the dignified transfer of soldiers who died in his war. Fox News aired the ceremony, except they did not air the actual ceremony. They broadcast footage from a different dignified transfer, one from Trump's first term, one in which he was not wearing the campaign hat. They substituted the footage. They showed their audience a version of events in which the President of the United States appeared at a military funeral in appropriate attire. They got caught. They issued an on-air correction. They called it an inadvertent error. I want to ask you something. When is the last time Fox News made an inadvertent error that made the president look more dignified? When has the margin of error at that network ever, in its entire history, bent accidentally in the direction of making the president appear to have exercised better judgment than he actually did? While Trump and Graham were projecting invincibility on American television, Iran's foreign minister went on Meet the Press and delivered something the White House clearly did not anticipate. Not rage, not desperation, not the posture of a regime under terminal pressure scrambling to negotiate from weakness. Calm, methodical, surgical. He laid out the logic in terms that anyone paying attention could follow. He said, "The last time you attacked us, we accepted the ceasefire in good faith. We exercised restraint. We framed it as self-defense, and we meant it. And then you used that pause to rearm and resume. You struck our schools. You struck our hospitals. You struck the water infrastructure that keeps our civilians alive. So no, we are not accepting another ceasefire, not another pause, not another handshake that gets used to reload. What we require is a permanent end to the war. And until that is on the table, in terms we can trust, we will continue fighting for the sake of our people and our security. This content is commentary and analysis for informational purposes only. It does not constitute financial, legal, or geopolitical advice. Consult qualified experts before making decisions based on events discussed.